Laurie Huston's News for the Heart is dedicated to helping you give a voice to your own soul. Our hearts have the power to free us from pain and the struggles that keep us from awakening to our true essence. Join Laurie now as we delve into our heart and soul to find the path that will open us to the possibilities and lead us to the life we love to live.
And good afternoon. This is News for the Heart. And today I have my awesome co-host Tom Campbell with me. Now, we're coming into Love Month. Obviously, it's in the middle of the month, but because we do our shows at the end of each month, if we waited until the end of next month, well, we'd be talking about spring. So we're going to talk about Love Month today. Well, it's been a rough couple years because connecting with people has been really challenging. I was actually able to do that this summer because walking has been kind of my thing, and I actually have created a really lovely connection. However, what we wanted to talk about maybe is even knowing that, we still kind of want to control the relationship. And I see it very quickly. We kind of think we know what's best. We want to, as somebody who's very much a caregiver, wanting to, care for the person or help them, but what I realize, of course, is really all I'm doing is trying to control it, thinking that I'm somehow right and they're not going to be. And it's just an interesting dynamic, I think. Because I'm kind of new into it. I'm not really doing it, but I'm aware when it happens so that I can kind of stop it. But I thought we would talk about, I guess, some of the things not to do in relationships, and then end it on a positive note with, things that are good for a relationship. So welcome to the show, Tom.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. It's always fun to be here. I enjoy these monthly sessions that we have together, and actually they turn out to be rather popular. The feedback that I get from at least my channel anyway is mostly very positive.
Very. Yeah. So let's talk about why. I mean, it's obviously our ego. It's us thinking we're right. It's us thinking that we somehow know more and we know what the other person needs or what we think the other person needs. It's,
Yeah. It's, what it boils down to, I guess, in the, at least this is one way to express it, is that we approach almost everything from the perspective of what's in it for me. What is this going to be for me? Is this going to work out to be something, I want? Is it going to meet my needs? Is it, the thing I need to do or want to do? So it's all about us. And most people would say, well, yeah, okay, but I'm me. So who else would it be about? Of course, I'm me. It needs to be about me. And everybody needs to be about them, and we go from there. But that's only because most everybody is full of ego and fear, which why it's about you is because of the needs you have and the wants and the desires and all of that. So that's the basic problem. And that's a real hard problem to fix because it's nothing that you can fake. It's nothing that you can pretend. It's really hard to keep an image going that is not you. So you do need to be authentic. But it's good to realize that authentic you is very self-focused. And you see the world in terms of how well that world suits you. And there's the things and the people that suit you and the things and the people that don't suit you, and you gravitate toward the ones that suit you best. And then you try to manipulate them to be more what you want, even though they're somewhat what you want to begin with, because that's why you're spending time with them. And then it's, well, but we could just smooth off some of these rough edges and, change this a little bit and change that a little bit. Then that would be better for me.
Right.
So, and it's such a common attitude that most people think, well, that's the way it should be. That's just normal. It is normal in the sense that, that's the fat part of the curve where most people are. Yes, it's quite normal, but it's not the way things really should be. Love is not about you. Love is something you give away. It's about the other person. It has to be about them, and the things you do and the things you say need to be about them. Need to make their life good or perfect.
Right.
And of course, if they feel the same way and they're trying to make your life perfect, you can see that it really works very, very well. But you'd have to find two people, both of which really were able to love in the sense that make it about somebody else. And that's hard to find. It's hard to find those two people anywhere, much less, those two people happen to run into each other. So what do we do with the real world? Here we are in the real world, and we have ego and we have fear. And of course, it's the fear that creates that ego, and it's the fear that makes us self-focused. It's that fear of being alone. It's that fear of not having somebody to share your life with. It's a fear of not being good enough. Will that person like me? Or do I have to change? Do I have to be different? This sort of thing. So we have all these fears going on, and it's those fears that make us think in terms of ourselves, because fear, just the opposite of love. Fear is always about you.
Right.
Fear is always about you. Love is always about somebody else. So it's about you, then the roots are in fear, not in love. Now, most people, have their own unique capacity to love. Everybody doesn't have the same capacity. Now, everybody has the same potential. Yes, we all have the potential to be perfectly loving, wonderful, low entropy beings. That's our potential. But most of us are not like that. But each of us has our own capacity to love. And that capacity to love is dependent on how much fear motivates us, how much fear we have. If we have a whole lot of fear, then our capacity to love is small, which means we can be loving just as much as we can. And in the bigger picture, it's just a small thing, because your capacity to love is exactly inverse to your capacity for fear. So if you have very little fear, then you have a large capacity to love. It's easy for it to be about other, you see. Mm-hmm. So first of all, everybody doesn't have the same capacity to love. Some people have a very small capacity to love. Others have a rather large capacity to love. Those people that you've met with a large capacity to love, those are the people who generally are smiling all the time. They're always nice. They always have something nice to say. They never seem to get upset or annoyed, or you've never seen them angry. They just seem to always be positive, friendly, nice people to everybody. And even if somebody is a little rude to them, it just kind of flows right by. In one ear and out the other. They don't pay any attention to it. They just keep on being nice. And those are people with a very large capacity to love. And you've also seen the opposite. Somebody that is snippy and finds fault with everything. Somebody who's constantly complaining because things aren't the way they want them to be, and so on. That's the person that has a small capacity to love. Now, that person with that small capacity could be in a relationship and just giving as much to it as they can. But what they can just isn't all that much. So you have to start off that everybody, comes with their own issues, their own fears, their ego. Very, very rare that you find somebody who's essentially doesn't have a lot of fear and ego. So a lot of fear and ego is just It's just the way it is, very common. I mean, that's why we're here, is to change that, to get rid of it. But meanwhile, so we have an individual who has some capacity to love and can love, but also has some capacity to be self-centered. It's about them. And you're going to have a relationship with such a person. So if you have a relationship with that person, you can't start out by saying, I want them to be other than how they are. Okay, I see the potential there, but I'm going to have to remake that, to make them as best for me as it can be for me. That's the temptation. We want to help them be better. Mm-hmm. We don't think a whole lot about helping ourselves be any better. We just we're okay. We're just the way we are, and that's all right. But almost everybody else in the world could use our help, to make other people better. So everybody does have some capacity to love, and everybody has some capacity, toward fear. Some of their choices are driven by fear, and some by love. And that capacity can change if you get rid of fear. It can grow. It can diminish if you pull on more fears. Right. So if you start a relationship with fear, is this going to work out? I really, really want a relationship to work out and to work out well, and I have fear that this one won't. Or if it really is a good relationship, you say, oh, this is too good to be true. Well, that's just negative fear-based thinking. And if you bring fear and negative thinking to a relationship, you are constraining that relationship, to be something less than it could be. So given that most of us have fear, and most of us are going to have a capacity more or less to love, starting a relationship with fears, it's just really a bad idea. So you need to start with, this person is okay, just the way they are. I don't need a perfect person. A perfect person would be nice, perfect for me, right? Meets all my needs, my desires, my wishes. This is the perfect person that fits my fears and my ego. It'd be nice to have that perfect person, but I'll just settle for a nice person, a good person, somebody who knows how to love at least some, who knows how to give and care, someone who's responsible and responsive. And then I'll just let them be whoever they are after that. I won't keep trying to put on the pressure and do the manipulation and lay those subtle hints that really aren't too subtle. I'll stop doing that to try to get them to be more perfect, more the way I want them. I'll just let them be who they are. And as I learn who they are and get to know them better, I'll just be okay with that. In other words, that's okay. I'll just love that. And it'll be that way. And if they've got a particular habit or thing that I really don't like, well, I'll just live with it. How big is it after all? How important is it? And I think most of the time we'd come to the conclusion, well, yeah, I don't particularly care for that, but it's really not that big a deal. It's easy enough to say, it's okay. I'll just live with that. So if you find somebody that you can live with that, whatever it is, then that's probably good enough to have a really good relationship with. So I think people start with the idea, they'll start with something that seems to have promise, and then they're going to fix it.
Right.
They're going to make it better. They're going to, they're going to change. And when you have that attitude, the message you're sending the other person is, well, I think you're okay, but you're really not good enough. Mm-hmm. I really need you to be some other way. And that is not a good message to send somebody you're trying to have a relationship with. Let them know that they're all right, but they're They really need to change and be better.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that then you get dissatisfied with that thing or that aspect that you don't like. And you think about that. And you try to change it, and it doesn't change. So you think more about it. You try harder to change it, and it doesn't change. Pretty soon, that one negative thing that you can't deal with is the biggest thing in the world, because you keep getting pushback on it, and your manipulations aren't working, because people don't like to be manipulated. In fact, they tend to push back and go the other direction and make it worse for you. So that's one thing. What is it with this person? Oh, they're messy. Oh, they leave, went to their house and they're messy. Had dirty dishes in the sink and, dirty socks on the floor, and they were just messy. I can't live in a messy house like that. All right. Well, you can think about that. I don't particularly want to live in a messy house either, but if I find a mess in my house, I clean it up. It's just not that big a deal. And Pamela does the same thing. If she finds a mess in the house, she cleans it up. So it just works out. But if she didn't clean it up, that would be okay too, because I can. And I suspect she feels pretty much the same way. So we take these issues we have with the person, and we make them bigger and bigger and bigger until they're very important. And mostly they're very, very important because we have failed to change them. And we give them more and more significance. Every time we try and fail to change them, we want to dig in and harder. And pretty soon, that whole relationship begins to fail based on that one thing that wasn't good enough. Whereas had you just looked at that in the beginning and say, okay, messy, okay, they, whatever. They eat junk food. They
eat sugar. Oh, no.
Yeah, they eat sugar. Yeah, who knows? They do some horrible thing like that. They, you know how it is. There's just little annoying things that aren't quite right, or they're not emotive enough. They don't share enough of their feelings, or whatever it is. Instead of making that the biggest thing ever, and then having that ruin a relationship, just live with it. Get to know it.
Well,
okay, let it be.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with expressing emotion or showing that you care is everybody is different. Some people, it's a physical thing. Some people, it's an emotional thing. Some people, it's, we all do it differently. Sometimes it's touching and holding hands. Sometimes it's doing your housework for you because you're messy. Sometimes, everybody is very, very different how they show their affection, but we tend to think, no, it has to be shown this way because that's how our parents showed it. And that's how we felt was love, because
exactly that is the case. So you have certain needs for them to show it the way it's meaningful to you. Well, the thing to do there, if they're not doing that, isn't to think, oh, they must not love me because they're not buying me expensive stuff all the time, or whatever it is that makes you think people love you, then, or how could they possibly love me if they don't clean up their messes? Instead of going there, have a conversation with them and tell them how you feel and the way things are, and how you recognize love.
Right.
What is it that you see? What is it that you have to see that is because of love or caring or even being considerate? What do you see? And they can tell you the same thing about them.
Exactly. Because
you'll find that most everybody's really different. And if this relationship is a male and a female, then there's a lot of stuff that's going to be different. If it's two males or two females, well, they have already got similar ways of seeing the world. But if it's a male and a female, they've got totally different ways of seeing the world. And depends a lot on the personality. If you have a personality that is insecure, then they need to be told at least 2 or 3 times a day how wonderful they are. They have to be appreciated quite obviously. Whereas if you have somebody who is very secure and very confident, if they kind of see that you love them today, well, a year from now, they still figure you love them. They don't have to be told constantly. Right. But some people do. Some people don't. So if the fact that your partner just doesn't seem to ever say anything that's very romantic doesn't mean that he doesn't care or that is not romantic. It just means that that's not the way he learned to express his feelings. You see, so that's why it's good just to accept people the way they are. Because what happens is after you really get to know them and understand them, everything's all right. You realize that, those dirty socks on the floor are not something personal because they don't appreciate you. It's just the way they've always been since they were 6 years old. They had a mom that picked up everything for them, and they don't see that as doing something that is upsetting you. Well, they won't realize it unless you tell them. Mm-hmm. Those socks on the floor, they really bother me because it seems to me that they're being, what is it? I take that as a negative toward myself, that you're above doing it, but it's my job, right. And that bothers me. And of course, it's very unlikely that that's the case, but that's what would be felt. But it's not the case at all. And they may say, oh, well, didn't know that meant so much to you. All right, I'll try, but I'll probably forget because it's my habit. And, when you have habits of a lifetime, they're a little hard to change. So you have to be patient, and you have to stay positive, and you have to use humor instead of getting angry and getting negative. So if you start with the idea that I'm not perfect and my partner really doesn't have to be perfect either, but we do have to care enough to get along. All right, so you get to that point, then just being positive and caring will eventually take you to that knowledge of what it is that makes them feel good or bad, what it is that makes them feel loved or unloved. And it'll take a while because people are very hesitant to talk about their personal needs, particularly with their significant other. Yeah. They're very hesitant to talk about it. Like, if I have to tell you, it doesn't count. If you do it just because I tell you, then it doesn't count. Well, if you don't tell them, then they just won't know. And the fact that they say, oh, okay, well, let me pick up my stuff right now. And you say, well, that doesn't count because I told you, I need you to do it without being told. Well, you see, that's not helpful. Just figure that it'll take time. You've got habits to change, and those habits may take a year or so to change. But change with positivity comes much quicker and much more, much more lasting than change with negativity. And you could say, well, every time I see those socks on the floor, I'm going to fuss and scream and pitch a fit. And pretty soon, they won't put them there. Well, that's the very worst way to train somebody, is with negativity. If you don't do what I want, I'll make you unhappy. I'll make your life miserable. Do what I want or I'll make your life miserable. That's not a good way to run a relationship. That's a terrible way to run a relationship. And
not only they miserable, you're going to be miserable too, because you're always thinking about it. It's just so silly.
Yeah. So that's a problem. But, that sort of idea is, what do they say? Like cutting off your nose to spite your face. You just keep making it worse and worse and worse. So stay positive. Always stay positive. You're not going to help somebody learn new behavior by being negative and fussing and complaining about it and throwing a fit. Yeah. Find another way to point it out, or point it out with a smile. Uh-oh, socks on the floor again. Put a penny in the jar, that sort of thing. Make it so it's not negative. Keep it positive. So that's kind of, I guess, my best advice for couples, particularly male-female, where they are very different the way they see reality. And in that case, you just need to give to it. Don't think of it as a relationship isn't something that you take from. Think of it as something you give to. Stay positive. It doesn't have to be perfect. You get closer and closer to perfection with time as you understand each other, as each person grows up and gets rid of some of that fear. Because you have more fear usually when you first start a relationship. There's a lot of fear about the relationship. And all of that will start to settle down and go away. Plus, there's other fears, like your fear of insecurity or not doing it well. Well, that fear can be greatly reduced just by somebody who cares a lot about you and you have confidence in the relationship. So you see, a lot of the stuff that makes you cold and prickly will go away if you can just be kind enough to let it go away. If you can just give enough to let it go away. Now, of course, this won't always work all the time. There are some people who are just negative. They're just very negative. They complain all the time, and they will find a reason to complain, no matter what happens, because that's what they are. Maybe they're a martyr, someone who defines their life in terms of their suffering. and they define how good they are by how much they suffer for other people. You see, when really
that person that does not sound fun.
No, that does not sound fun. But there are people who are like that. That's a pretty common personality type. That people who define themselves and they define their own positiveness in terms of how much they suffer for others. And they want everybody to know how they suffer for others. And they want everybody to know how much they suffer and how much they suffer for other people. And that is how, that's what gives them their positives, is their suffering for other people. Well, you can see that somebody like that finds more and more to suffer as they go along. The suffering gets better and better as they go along. But they end up getting depressed. They end up getting depressed and upset, and their life becomes very low quality. So you need to be just the opposite of that. You need to give willingly to things. And you need to really look at these little things and not make big things of them. Okay, every day you may have to pick up a pair of socks off the floor. Now, how big a deal is that really? Not much at all. But if you see that as a sign of disrespect, well, then it's a big deal. Well, see, that's your fear. Getting in the way, taking something that's rather benign and turning it into something that's terrible. Taking something that should not damage a relationship and turn it into something that does. So that's kind of the general viewpoint. We have to try to raise our capacity to love. And by doing that, we need to stay positive. And we cannot act this. We have to be it. If it's just your image, that's what we call courting, right? Where everybody presents themselves in their best image, and how nicely that goes along. Everybody's really, really happy and really, really up, and it's great until the people get to the point where they can't do that anymore and they have to become their real selves. And then suddenly, the relationship isn't so good anymore because they have to be real. Better to be real right from the beginning. If somebody doesn't like your real self, well, say bye-bye. Yeah. We're not compatible. And if you really don't like somebody's real self, better to just say bye-bye and you're not compatible. So be your real self. Show who you are. Have the courage to tell them how you feel. Don't tell them how angry you are or how negative or how bad they are. Just tell them how you feel. those socks on the floor really make me feel bad because I feel like you don't care about me, you see. And the other person would probably say, what? My socks make you feel that I don't care about you? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. You know, they won't understand that. But they will probably want to not make you feel bad, so they'll be willing to learn, but chances are it won't be quick. It'll take a while. And it's not just the socks, you know, there's something else too, you know, and so on. But it's two people growing together, two people helping each other, you know, raise the quality of their consciousness. That is a really great relationship. So it doesn't mean that there isn't sometimes turmoil and hard discussions and things. That's part of growing up. That's not to be avoided. That's to be met head on and dealt with, not swept under the rug. And make sure that your, you know, the negatives that you talk about are not saying as demands, do this or else. Because if your whole approach to an argument is my way or the highway, you know, you're going to end up a martyr. You're going to end up, you know, with a bad situation. Yeah, so don't start any argument as this has to change and it has to be the way I want it. That is just very self-centered.
Usually what happens with me is that I don't generally address the other person. I usually go, okay, if I'm upset, this is me. So what am I really upset about? What is the fear that is underlying? Is it, you know, the fear of the unknown? Is it the fear of the known? Is it, you know, what is the real fear that I'm going through? Because it's not them. If I'm getting triggered, it's me being triggered. Usually it has nothing to do with the other person. It's just, it's something that I see. And so usually I work to try and go, okay, this is my fear, has nothing to do with them. What's going on? Right.
But you should share that. You should share your feeling. You see, you should say, you know, this is how that makes me feel. And they may not be able to understand that at all, to figure out why you would possibly feel that way from what they're doing. But that doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter whether how you feel is rational or irrational. It makes no difference. It's just, this is how that makes me feel. And I realize that my choice, my feelings are mine, and I'm responsible for them. And I'm trying really hard, you know, to not feel that way. But I just want you to know this is how I feel. But I take responsibility for it. So you need to be open. You need to tell people those things, because otherwise they have no idea.
That's true.
They just have no idea how it might make you feel. So if you tell them, not in a, here's what you've done wrong, but just in a, here's how I feel. And if they kind of say, well, I can't see how you could possibly feel that, you can see, well, that really doesn't matter, because I can't help feeling that way. That is just the way I am. It's the way I feel. Let them know. And if they care, then they're going to try not to make you feel that way. If they have any caring. You see, but even if they don't, you keep on being positive, because eventually they'll say, oh, you know, maybe I should be a little more caring here in this relationship. People do change, but usually not quickly. Mm-hmm. People do suddenly realize that they've got it really good, or the other people are trying and they're not, and they all of a sudden realize they need to get it together and start trying harder. But they never come to that conclusion if you fuss at them. Right. Because if you fuss at them, they'll always defend, and in their mind, they will be right and you will be wrong. And they're not going to change. So as much as you're going to fuss about it and tell them how bad they are for doing that, you're going to make it impossible for them to grow up and change. Inasmuch as you just keep giving to the situation and just say, well, that's me. I need to let go of that fear and fix it. Eventually, they'll have a much higher probability of actually seeing the problem and realizing that they should help. They should help. They should change what they're doing. So you can get somebody to change, but not by lecturing, not by pointing out how they need to change. That's almost guaranteed to make them not change. You get somebody to change by just giving to them, by being caring, because people do appreciate that. They do notice. Even if it takes them a while to get it, they will notice. So that's the way, you could say that's the way to manipulate people, not by lecturing to them, but by just letting them learn on their own. Well, you're not really manipulating them. You're just giving them an opportunity to learn. You're giving them an opportunity to grow. You're providing them with enough information that they can get an aha moment and fix themselves, grow up a little bit, because you've given them that safe, caring space in which they can do that. Whereas if they're under fire and they had a finger pointing at them like that, they're not going to change. They'll be worse. So, relationships can grow to be a lot more, particularly if the two people in them are willing to grow. And if they basically are good people, nice people that aren't really self-centered. If you get somebody that's very self-centered, and if you're self-centered to the extreme, we call you a narcissist. But if you're just self-centered, then you're, half a narcissist. It's still not helpful. So making it always about you is a sign that you're self-centered. Now, if it's just occasionally about you, that's okay. Occasionally things are about you. But if your whole viewpoint in life, in the world, in the relationship is all about you, then that's self-centeredness.
Yeah.
So,
fine line.
What's that?
It's a fine line sometimes, because you're used. Change is hard, right? If you've been alone for a long time and then enter into a relationship, and then you're thinking all the time about, what would be best. It's just an interesting, it doesn't work, but it is, it's an interesting thing that I think we go through when, like you said, when we have fears or we're feeling vulnerable or we're not clear about, the next step or where it's going and stuff. So it's, Well, that brings up a very good point, and it's a big difference between the men and the women, and it's a real big point that women are fundamentally geared to deal with relationship. That's their thing. That's their primary thing. It's relationship, connectedness, interacting with other people. That's important to them. That's why women say roughly twice as many words in a given day as men do, because they're networking, they're sharing, that they're in a relationship. They have to be communicating a lot. It's important. That's why women tend to always have girlfriends, that men don't have that same kind of connection. Well, women use their intellect to work their relationships. That's a problem. If you use your intellect to say, well, what's wrong and how should I be? Now you're not just being, you're thinking about how your image should be. How should I act? What should I be like? And now I'm going to try to be this way. That is not a good way to approach relationship. And men now are the opposite. Men's natural place where they function is the outside world. They manipulate or manage things in the outside world. Women manage things, manipulate in the inside world. Well, so men, they're very astute on every detail and what's happening out in the outside world and why it's happening. And they can take a car apart and put it back together again, because those are the kinds of things that they do.
and they use their intellect to do all that stuff. When it comes to relationship, they hardly think about it at all. They just go with their feelings and their intuition. They don't think about it very much, which is why it's so hard to get that guy to pick up his dirty socks, because he just doesn't think about it very much. He's not used to thinking in terms of, if I do that, they'll do this. That's a relationship thought. You see, so they just kind of blunder into a relationship and get along the best they can and are mostly clueless most of the way, through a relationship. They have feelings, they get connected. The relationship is important to them, but they don't manage it with their intellect. They just are, and they just do things. Females, on the other hand, want to manage that relationship with their intellect. What should they do? How should they be doing it? Everything from, how they wear their hair to, whether they cook or don't cook or whatever, they're thinking all the time. What should they be doing and how should they be doing it? Because that's their main area of functionality is in relationship. So each gender uses their intellect in that area that they are most suited for. And they just kind of get along, kind of blunder their way through in those areas that are not their specialty. So most ladies couldn't care less how to take a car apart and put it back together again. It's like, why ever should I learn that? They don't see any need to do that, to get into those sorts of things. They're just not inclined. And if they get a package or something and it looks like it's, meant to never be opened by anybody less than Hercules himself, well, they'll go hand it to a man and say, here, open this for me. That's not their thing. You see, they kind of get around in the outside world, not really as effectively as the men do. And they blunder around there because they just are kind of are the way they are. Whereas men, that's the way they are in relationship. They're not thinking. They just are the way they are. And they don't know how to be any other way. They don't understand relationship. Understanding relationships like a female understanding how to put the car back together again, They don't understand it. And they don't really want to understand it. They just want to be in it. And they value it, but they never think about it in the same rational terms that ladies do. So in the outside world, men are very rational. Inside world, they're hardly rational at all. That's why women look at men and say, well, these guys, they never get it, do they? You really have to put it right in their face and, and shake it in front of their eyes before they see anything. They don't have any idea. And in relationship, a female can manipulate a man very easily in that relationship because he doesn't think about it at all. He just experiences it and feels it. And if it feels good, that's good enough. Right. He never notices that, he's being manipulated. So women find it trivial to manipulate men. Men have no idea what's going on. And they generally don't try and don't manipulate women. That's the way it is. So that's a thing. If you're coming at your relationship entirely intellectually, that is going to be a problem because relationship isn't an intellectual issue. The problems in relationship are not intellectual issues. They don't have an intellectual solution. If you say, well, I should do this and I should do that, and if I do, he'll feel like this, and all of that is really beside the point. You'd be much better if you just get authentic and be who you are. Something happens and it doesn't feel right, say it. This doesn't feel right to me. Don't say you're wrong and have to change. Say this doesn't feel right to me. And ask him to do the same thing. Because he won't say anything about it at all, ever. He just kind of blunders through it. He doesn't think about it like women do. He doesn't plan. Now, so the ladies see this guy and he's doing these things, and she figures he's doing them on purpose. He is planning. He is thinking about it. That's why throwing the socks on the floor looks to her like disrespect. Well, I don't have to put my socks away. I've got a woman to put them away. Here, woman, put my socks away. But he's not thinking like that at all. He's just doing what he does the way he's always done it his whole life. And, and he takes his socks off and he throws them over his shoulder. And he's been doing that since he was 3 years old. And nobody ever told him no, because his mom picked his socks up and didn't say anything. So you see, he's not intellectualizing any of that. But because she does, she imagines that he's thinking like her, and he's doing that stuff on purpose, and that it means something. To a female, everything that's done has meaning behind it in a relationship. It means something. It can be interpreted. You see, everything is done for a reason. Now, he's like that in the outside world. He thinks about everything that he does out there, whatever he's doing in the outside world. But he comes home and he doesn't think about anything anymore. His relationship is just, he walks through it one step at a time. And he's surprised, probably 80% of the time, his wife is angry with him. He's surprised. Mm-hmm. Why should she be angry? That's why men go around saying that they don't understand women. I guess women don't understand men either, but they probably think they do more than they do, because both think that women think men are like them and men think that women are like them. So you think that other people are going to be like you. They're going to think about things and act the way that you would act. So when we say, well, what was he thinking? Well, if I did that, here's the way I'd be thinking. If I threw my socks on the floor, that would be, you pick them up. I don't want to, or it's your job, or something like that. That's what a female would have to be thinking. If she did that, it'd be on purpose. She'd do it because it's a statement. He's not making any statements. He's just being who he is. You see? So the ladies who try to figure out, what should I do next? How should I do this? How should I do that? Mostly, you just work yourself into a blind spot. You'll work yourself into a tizzy. You won't know. You'll never know. But your intellect keeps wanting to solve a problem intellectually, and it's not an intellectual problem. Right. So that's why, you have to figure this out and figure that out. And what should I do? And how will he respond to that? And if he does this, how should I respond to that? All of that intellectualizing turns you into an image, not into a person. And now you're living your intellectual image, but that intellectual image is a shell. It's empty. That's not where your heart is. Your heart doesn't live in that image. Your heart lives in the real world. It just is. It just does. It feels. So the one thing I would tell the ladies is, stop thinking. Stop trying to do it right so it comes out the way you want. Just be who you are. Just interact. Don't attribute reasons to things that aren't there. Because your guy doesn't have a whole lot of reasons. He's not doing everything because it's meant to send a message. He just does stuff because that's what he does. And probably because that's his habit and he's never learned better. So a lot of those things would change if he had a positive influence to change them. But if you point out and fuss at him, then chances are he's not going to change any of it, because to change it now would be to show weakness. It would be, these kinds of things. And you don't do that, because that's the kind of thing he learns in his outside world, is that you never show weakness. Because if you show weakness or you show hurt, then you'll be taken advantage of. And that's the beginning of eroding your own personal power out in the world. So he knows that. So he just translates that into a relationship, which of course makes him do all the wrong things at the wrong time and say all the wrong things at the wrong time. And the lady sitting there thinking, getting it all figured out in her intellect, which makes her say all the wrong things at the wrong times. And you see how hard it is for a relationship to get going between a male and a female. It's, it takes a lot of just acceptance of the other person the way they are. and really a judge of, okay, that's a bad trait, but how bad is it? Is that something I can just live with or do or pick up the slack for or whatever? Or is it really a showstopper? Well, if it's a showstopper, then you better deal with it right now and up front if that's a showstopper. If it's not a showstopper, then let it go. Stop focusing on it.
Yeah.
It's not a showstopper, just let it be. But be honest about how it makes you feel. But then just leave it at that. Don't demand that something be done about it. Just let him know. And because he's slow and because he doesn't use his intellect in relationship, it might take him a while before he gets it, but he will eventually get it. And he'll appreciate you. And he'll appreciate that you don't, nag at him or hassle him or tell him he's wrong, but you just let him see the result of his actions. All right? You have to do whatever you have to do, and things that you don't care for, well, he knows you don't care for him, but you do them anyway, and you do them with a smile. And he knows that's just because you care for him, which makes him feel good and makes him want to care for you. You see, it's just those things reinforce. So instead of getting the negatives reinforcing each other, we get the positives to reinforce each other. And the only way to do that is by making the whole idea, what can I give? How can I help, rather than what can I get and how much can I take? You just have to make it about the other. And guess what? That's love. That's real, honest to goodness love. So I don't know. I guess I kind of said it, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to
it. No, it's good. I think it's a good way to see everything, but definitely in a significant relationship, but all relationships. I mean, if we could just look at it from, what can I give, and just accept them, because it's true. I mean, we have our own beliefs from how we were raised, and that we kind of stick with those because that's how we saw, or that's how we felt love had to be shown. I mean, that's why so many women repeat patterns of people that are unavailable, or people that stray, or, I mean, if it was something that was really important in your family dynamic, you kind of take that with you. Yes. So unless you're willing to see that this is just a fear that you keep bringing up, or keep seeing the pattern. I mean, there's so many people that I've counseled that's like, but I never did anything. It's like, no, but that's her fear. I mean, that's what she sees. So it's hard for her to get out of that pattern, because everything's going to make her, everything's going to remind her of something that happened in the past, or it's a hard
right.
thing.
Yeah. Well, and hey, guy, if she has this pattern and that's the way she sees things, then why don't you change yourself so that you don't trigger that pattern? How about that for a solution? You see, instead of how am I going to make this woman change, it's how can you change yourself to be more helpful and more valuable to your woman? You see, and of course it works the opposite way too. That's if you just work from the positive rather than from the negative.
Yeah,
I don't like this. How can I change it? That's negative.
Right.
The positive is that's the way it is. How can I work with that to make it better? How can I make that never trigger? How do I have to be to help that person? And then that person is aware that you are trying not to make that trigger. So then they feel very kindly towards you, and then they'll pick up your socks and so on. It just, the positives build very quickly and make good relationship. The negatives always destroy and tear down. So if you're feeling negative, you need to just stop yourself and say, don't do that. Don't feel negative about it. Now, unless you just, are paired with an evil person, then get away, go someplace else. It's time to cut the relationship. off. But most people aren't evil like that. Most people really would like a good relationship. They just can't get out of their own self-centered needs to have one. They're stuck in those needs. So they just need to fix themselves, because you can never fix somebody else. So just let somebody else be however they are. You learn to live with it joyfully. And then they'll start to change if you live with it joyfully. Whereas if you fuss at it and try to make a change or manipulate a change, not only will they not change, but they would become more negative, which will make you more negative, which will make them more negative. And pretty soon it's an ugly situation.
Yes, definitely. And we don't even realize what we're doing half the time.
No, we don't yet.
We just don't.
An awful lot of the dysfunction in a relationship isn't even actually dysfunction if you understood where it was coming from. It's misunderstanding more than anything else.
Yeah.
It's mostly just misunderstanding yourself and misunderstanding the other person. Being negative. We think that's the way to solve a problem, is with force. Our culture kind of tells us that. That's how you solve problems, is you push back until you overwhelm the problem or beat it into submission. And that's not the way you solve problems in a relationship. You solve them by giving to them, not by trying to force them away.
Wow, this has been a really good show. I'm surprised that we've almost come to the end so quickly.
Yes, it did get to the end pretty quickly.
We did.
Well, it's a different show. I don't think we've ever gone over this sort of material before. It's kind of new. Yeah,
that's good. All right. Well, you've been listening to the News of the Heart with Tom Campbell. We've been getting the heart of what matters, talking about, I guess, Love Month and, how we can use positivity and acceptance to create a richer dynamic within our relationships. And I think that's a good place to begin. But yeah, you've given some really good tips here. So yeah, I love it. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome, Laurie.